Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is not Friday. In fact, it's actually almost the next Friday, but I should have had How to Bass last Friday, but things. Anyway, today I'm going to show you how to make this sound. There's a lot going on in here, and it was actually a bit of a thing I wanted to do, which was to do a lot of stuff. And also a thing I wanted to do was use Serum because I hadn't been using a whole lot of it. And I really tried to kind of approach this in ways that were new for me. And I ended up doing a lot of the similar stuff that I'm used to doing, but I kind of approached a couple of them in a couple of new ways. As kind of like the last How to Bass when I was more or less trying the same thing, only this time I actually have an appropriate visual aid to explain to you how the distribution window in Vocodex works, because it's a rather important part of what makes this sound, and it's really hard for me to explain it without an example, so I made an example. Anyway, let's begin at the beginning with this. We'll talk about Vocodex when we get there. Let's just... Okay. So here's the beginning of this. Lots of stuff going on in there. That's all loud, damn. But kind of the main thing that's going on is that there's this saw square weird WRD. I guess that stands for weird. I'm not totally sure. But what's neat about the square position is that it isn't completely perfect, which means that while it accentuates the harmonics that are normally associated with a square, there's still a little bit of that bite that gets you from the saw wave. And especially because you're morphing between it, that bite's almost always there. So we're able to get sort of the harmonic quality of the hollowness of a square wave, but still have the toothiness of a saw wave, given, you know, all those combos that we talk about. All those words made sense, I promise. And then I'm also automating the asymmetry on here, but this oscillator isn't being heard because all this thing is doing is FMing this guy. And this is the I Can Has Kick oscillator, the wavetable rather. And here's the FM from A and the wavetable. And a lot of times when I use, I almost called it massive. A lot of times when I use Serum, and actually a lot of times when I use massive too, for the same reason, I want to make macros. I want to like take all the parameters and link them to one thing and make that thing the sound, right? And like there's a time and a place for that, and for a long time I actually didn't do that, and kind of like had a hard time trying to get the sounds that created, which is like the really solid and even sounding sounds, which are more or less the same on every modulation because everything is moving all at once. So in this time I decided I'm just gonna take the parameters I'll use, and then this time I will just automate them individually. Although I do have a macro, and this particular macro is controlling the wavetable position of this guy, which I moved all the way over there, so I wasn't gonna do anything. Asymmetry, wavetable, and FM from A for the two oscillators, and also it's controlling the reverb filter inside the effects section. Should probably turn all these off though while we're talking about what's going on up top. Bam. So that like real phasing thing that's happening there is happening because I have unison engaged, but it's not static. I'm actually automating the detune knob. And when that happens, actually real quick, I'm just gonna make sure that I have the right setting set up. I do. I don't. Do I? I don't. Whoops. Well, pretty sure I haven't tried to, there you go. Pretty sure I haven't tried to put in any menus yet, so, yeah, whatever. We're back. Anyway, automating detune is getting us that, and the detune automation is way down here. You can kind of see that it's really kind of sudden in some points. Like if I already end here, that kind of like weird little squeezy feeling, that came from the detune. I think that right there is also kind of sort of what that does. Now, the interesting thing about automating detune of unison is that you might think to yourself, okay, so we start at the bottom where there's no unison, and we just get, like, if we're doing a saw wave, it's just a saw wave, and all the way up top we get, like, a super saw. Thing is, though, is that the detune amount it only changes the change due to pitch phasing. You might be thinking, what else is there? And the answer is that when the pitch is different and it causes phasing because of the traveling and the phase cancellation as a result of having different pitches, if you close the pitches, it doesn't go back. It doesn't go back to its original phase. It just stops changing phase. So whatever phase it got to, it stays there. So that's why we get that kind of phasey metallic feeling coming at the end here, even though the detunes got lower values because of the motion ahead of time. It went places and it didn't come back, so that's why that happens. And yeah, I have the sub on and it's going on direct out, which means inside Serum, this means it is not getting affected by the effects in here. However, it is getting affected by the effects inside this business. And like, I actually did try to high pass this and make a separate sub, but I automated the pitch knob here, and for some reason I had a hard time getting a sub to actually match up properly, for a lot of different reasons, and I honestly decided it wasn't worth it. So there's I don't think I'm doing anything else special up the front here. Nope, that's pretty much it. All right, now in the effects section begins with a distortion unit. Come on. So I'm automating the drive knob, and I have it on X-Shaper mode. This is the mode where it turns the distortion unit inside Serum to basically behave exactly like the wave shaper inside FL, or really any other wave shaper, because I guess that's just how they work. The cool thing about it, though, is that there's this edit A and edit B. And what that means in this instance is that the drive knob actually represents edit A over here and edit B over here. It does not mean 0 to 100. It means A to B, which means you can have some completely random 100% super distortion here and some other completely random super distortion here and fade between them. And in this case, I have pretty regular big old saturation and then some sharpness going on, whatever. And like, I really didn't pay too close attention to what was going on, just that I wanted it to be different. And then I'm automating it. This is the reverb filter. Now, the cool thing about the reverb filter is that, well, it sounds like reverb in the filter format, which is just kind of bonkers to begin with. But when you move it, it gets you its own kind of phasiness. Jesus. I also cranked the drive knob. Gain staging is actually super cool when it comes to sounds like this, when they're talking like different levels of dynamics control, like distortion or compressing, because how loud the thing is going into that beforehand actually changes the character of how it comes out. So that's why I screwed around with that. Anyway, the point I was going to make is that at the lower values of the reverb filter, it gets like really muddy, like really you can't really get a lot out of it unless you're like not moving the thing at all. But if you move it at higher values, you get that kind of nice, almost phasery effect. The motion that you want to have with it, if you want really real control, is not very wide and not very fast. But I linked it to the macro that's controlling these guys. Now, the macro and the control for these did kind of have their own little tone. You heard them when they were doing it, but they weren't meant to be like the main rhythm. And much like a whole bunch of other stuff I do, the main rhythm in this song, or track bass, the main rhythm in this bass is being controlled by a bandpass filter. So there wasn't like the whole point of all of this stuff, more or less before the bandpass filter, is to create this change in character, but not so much a rhythmic change. Although it can be if you decided you want to. Thing is, though, is if you whip this particular parameter around particularly fast, it gets real kind of bad. Depending on what you're going for. If you're going for some kind of like a gargly, ridiculous, like super distortion, then yeah, that's your bag. Next up is the EQ. This is something else that I just decided to automate a lot. There is a high pass filter going on, but it's very low Q, so it's not as like wah filtery as it is just kind of stuff. The other thing going on is this peak filter when I'm automating the frequency, the Q, and the gain. Now, a peak filter is one that can go positive and negative, so it's sort of like a bandpass, but it's not a bandpass or a notch, but it's not 100% either direction. It's just like you can make it go on either way, and you can control its position, and you can control the Q or the bandwidth, and so I'm automating all three of these, and they're more or less going in random directions. Huh. After that, it's going into the compressor. Boink. Nice. And that is the whole chain inside Serum. The compressor, when in multiband mode, is pretty good about like controlling strange dynamics that come about as a result of filtering, mostly, because a lot of like if you look at if you just play a saw wave and you play it out, you look at the level's all nice and static, but a majority of that level comes from the low end of the spectrum, all the first couple harmonics. So when you do something like high pass, the something level just drops, It's gone. And while the perceived loudness of the rest of the harmonics might not change, when you start to add a whole bunch of different effects to it and stuff like that, especially things like distortion, it might not kind of stick there. It might not stay like audible even. And frequently what happens to me is that like those kind of barely inaudible moments have the coolest tones. They're the ones that have the neatest little like moments that you want to hear the most. And so you want to use multi-band compression to make sure that all of them are going to be audible at any given time. And also not wildly louder than you need them to be. Wildly louder than you need them to be. So yes, good jobs here. Now, in the effects, first thing I did was evoke an X. Now, this is a little bit more of the same, but also slightly different, and I do mean slightly. So, whole 50 bands, honestly, like a lot of these parameters and also a lot of the animations that I chose, I really just sort of moved stuff around while I was listening to it to determine what was going to happen. But I can at least tell you why it happened that way. I have the carrier turned up a bit with the low pass far enough. This is basically what you do to get the sub to come out of Vocodex, because whatever bass processing you actually get out of the bands inside Vocodex is not going to be Vocodex is not going to be as good as just having a sub. Having a separate sub would also be sufficient. I tried to say efficient and sufficient, which just came out efficient. That's weird. And stuff like that. I am, however, automating some things. I am automating the bandwidth and the pitch. And the bandwidth has its particular thing going on, and the pitch has also its particular thing going on. These windows, if you're not familiar, what they do is that they all alter these parameters on a per band basis. Loud. Damn. You can tell I haven't listened to this without the effects on. How the hell loud is this? Anyway, you can kind of see here how some of the bands are thicker than others, and that's because they have said it to be that way by this graph. It's really kind of straightforward. The thing that's a bit crazy, though, is what's going on with the band distribution window. Now, I've tried a whole bunch of times to explain how this works, and like I almost never get it right. Or at least I never present it in a way that like makes sense to anybody. So instead, this time I actually have a whole separate thing that I have designed purely so that I can explain to you exactly what Vocodex does. Okay. Come on. All right. So I have here noise, and I have here the bands. Now, look inside, look into my eyes, look into my EQ, and we'll see here what the bands are doing. I think I've already screwed with this though. I totally have. All right. I put some noise in there, and I have 11 bands. So here they are. You can see the bands. Like here, like this is basically what happens to a carrier signal when it gets broken up by these bands. And when we do things like change how wide they are, they can be real thin or real thick. Like this is what bandwidth literally means. Now, where the bands are determined by a number of things, but most directly the band distribution window. Now, one of the reasons why I freaked out about the old vocoder being able to automate in a particular interesting way is that this guy actually can do more in that regard, but it can't automate it because of the way that it does it. What happens is that this line here determines essentially the spread. If it's one-to-one like this, where it's like all the way to the bottom, all the way to the top, it's a completely even distribution all the way to top to bottom. But if I were to do that, you can kind of see how now it's starting to crunch up top. Well, and there's less in the bottom here. And what this is doing, like, you can view this graph as being a sideways this. Like, you can think of it that this line going straight up from the bottom here, which is incredibly misleading because the bars at the bottom here are going the way you want them to, and they don't move when you do this, so you can't see really what you're doing. But then if I go back to like band gain, you can see, oh, it's totally doing that. You can see how like the line is steeper here and then leveling off here. The leveling off determines how like where the bands spend their time. And to better illustrate that, let's talk about what happens when we start to make like a more interesting graph. So like now they're evenly distributed. Now watch what happens when I flatten this like that. Do you see what happened to the bands? Like a lot of them kind of just came in here. Now they're all like right there. Like there's one or two bands that got stuck up in there, and that's because these bands are, instead of going up where they're going, are now staying at this line. You can see that when I do that, like all these bands are now moving down to that particular frequency because that's what this flat line represents. It represents, like if we were to just rotate the whole thing sideways, it represents those bands being where that like right at that exact position. That's what the band distribution window does. And when I was doing the thing like this, for example, you can see that like it starts to move the bands around in a very weird way. And by the way, not only can they like go down, but they can also go below other bands. So like a high band that's being triggered by high frequency modulator modulator information can actually affect low frequency carrier information, and totally just remove any feeling at all of like a traditional vocoder sense. Because like that like vocoder feeling or that Vocodex feeling, because I've used Vocodex for years and honestly didn't mess around with this too much, comes from the specific order and the specific distribution, specific bandwidth and all of that of the bands, and in particular where the bands are. So and also what information triggers what band and what position and all that stuff. And this lets you control that. This lets you just change it all. It basically makes it a new vocoder. It's really very interesting. Downside being that you can't automate it, because in the old vocoder, you could. Only you were limited to very specific distributions, and you couldn't do crazy stuff like this. Honestly, I prefer to be able to do that, but why can't we have both? Maybe that's in the future. But yeah, so that's the visual aid of what that was. And I know that there wasn't audio there. I didn't put it on purpose because it's noise. Anyway, back to the real guy. Along with doing this craziness, again, something that I did while listening to it, kind of moving it around, I've also turned the wet all the way up and turned the SG off. SG, by the way, stands for Sound Goodizer, and it's basically just a little mini Maximus that limits it and makes it sound kind of okay. However, remember that thing we talked about gain staging before? I did not want that signal. I wanted that signal to have its dynamics as it gets processed by the other stuff. And a lot of things actually get a little bit better when you do that. Like I'm particularly fond of like using just Maximus and then some stuff, the Maximus and some stuff, the Maximus. And if on every single one of those Maximi, I'm using the master limiter, I have the three bands that are doing what they're doing, and then I limit them on the master, and then I process it some more. That master limiter is actually like doing some things that I probably don't want it to do most of the time. I mean, honestly, you know, whatever, if it sounds fine, it's fine. But like the point being is that you have slightly more control over your dynamics if you let them do their thing until like the end. Most of the time, it's really, I just wanted to put that idea in there because there's not really a right or wrong about that. Anyway, the next step after the Vocodex is this EQ, which is like really minor. You can see that like I'm not really doing too much in regards to it, but like it's there to control the ludicrousness that is how loud this thing is. And then, of course, the Maximus. So now I'll turn this back up because it's probably limited. Oh, actually, no, it's not, because all that stuff I just talked about, I actually did here. Because I had my low, mid, and high, which are all doing real basic, just low, mid, high stuff. And the master's off. When I pick a band and when I want, like, to do, like, trying to think of the best way to explain how to choose band positions. It's mostly by listening, to be honest. Like, there's not a lot of science in terms of where to put what, and even if there was, it'd be different for every single sound anyway. So mostly just put stuff around, but like much like the multi-band inside Serum, the whole point of doing this is that like I want to balance out the spectrum so that I can control its behavior versus sort of being at the whim of whatever it decides it wants to do. It's the whole point of compression. And then after that, ye old bandpass filter with some stuff. Probably, okay, this is what this sounds like with the Maximus. Still loud as balls. So now, all that stuff we did up until this point, the Vocodex, everything inside Serum, the other EQ, this Maximus, and everything is designed to create the character that we talked about before. And then this filter is now bringing back the rhythmic sensibility. And then the last Maximus is here to kind of bring it back. So I do want to highlight one particular application of the band distribution window. And you see how this high band is like canked all the way up. It's cranked all the way up and like super compressed, and like you're really like pulling it in there. And that's because there wasn't a lot going on there. But when there were high frequencies, they were quite piercing. So the question becomes why? Why did that happen? Lots of this stuff that we do does this, but in particular, the band distribution window has a nice little part to play in how the high end plays out. So like you notice, like you can just listen to it while I'm doing it. That's not even the right one. No wonder it wasn't changing. Come on. There you are. Yeesh. Here we go. See, you see how it kind of acted like a low pass filter? It isn't quite filtering it though, but it's altering the distribution of the bands that are up there. So if because like that piercing kind of like Actually, we can just look at it in the filter. Or maybe we can't. Let's get us this guy. Come on. I keep missing. New mouse, you see. I'm clicking on you. There you go. You see how the harmonics have like they're not like completely flat the whole way up there. They're not even the whole way up there, and like they kind of move around in between them. Like where the movement comes through is determined more or less by what the bands are doing. And if like the band distribution controls what the bands are doing, then it also controls the result of that high frequency information. Again with the wrong vocodex. How does that happen? And the other EQ, come on, there we go. Donate serum. Oh boy, my accuracy is like losing it. My old mouse died. It was a Microsoft Laser Mouse 5000, 6000. Let me actually look. 6000. Yep, V1. I know they made more than they might have, but whatever. October 2005 is when this mouse happened. And I've used it since, and it died. It took a long time, but it died. This is a Razer Mamba. They gave it to me. Anyway, talking about distribution there. So here's a good example. Like right there, you saw like if I moved just a straight line, just that one tip there, it was either like high frequencies or no frequencies. But then when I brought the band down like this, like the little line down like this, you see, okay, mostly low frequencies, but still some high frequencies. So that meant that like we didn't lose the high frequencies. We just limited how many of them like are really there at that one particular time, but not in such a linear way. It still allows you to have the dynamics of the vocoder's processing, but it doesn't like limit you to specifically like whatever it wants to do. That's the kind of control of the band distribution window grants you. This is here to kind of just add to the formant equalities. Everything that's happening in the sound is just adding to the formant equalities, and it all adds up to creating this like weird formant Reese, which is pretty dope if I do say so myself. And that's this sound. This FLP will be available to download in the description of this video, and also so will the Serum preset by itself, just in case you're interested in the first half of that. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And as usual, have a nice day.